Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 225. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, June the 19th, from the James Strong Studio in Western St. Charles County. We're doing an audible today. This week I had the podcast written, ready to go, and things happened in the news. I thought, you know what? I know I've put a lot of time and effort into writing this podcast, preparing this podcast, but I don't want to do it on this subject. So I've got one in the books, or not in the books, I guess, but I got one in reserve, let's just say, for a later day. So we're going to do an audible today, as Peyton Manning used to say, Omaha. We're going to do an audible. We're going to do something a little bit different. And it has to do with the news cycle. And I'll explain that. I'll explain that in a moment. Don't worry, this is not going to be a reading of the news. We're not going to talk about controversial politics, anything like that. But it just has to do with the news cycle, how it is, the sources, what they say, what they mean, what's important to me, which may not be important to you, and how this whole COVID-19 pandemic shutdown has affected the news cycle and affected people as well. So I put a lot of time and effort into this second podcast that I've written this week. And I think you'll find it interesting and informative. Before we do that, though, I do want to give an update on the Jaguar, my 1951 Jaguar Mark 7 that my father and I are restoring, rebuilding, bringing back to life, so to speak. My goal was to get this thing ready for sandblasting and painting by the end of the summer. That was my goal. Well, I'm there. 100% done. Everything that needs to be stripped off is stripped off. It's ready to take off to the guy who's going to sandblast it, prime it, paint it, remove the engine, remove the transmission, rebuild both of those, and then I get it back and get to put everything back together. So a lot of work has been done to this car so far. There's a lot more work to be done to this car, but I'm happy to report that I'm probably a little bit ahead of schedule, and cross our fingers, depending on how quickly this guy can get this car into his shop and sandblast it, take all the rust off, repair the little bit of sheet metal work that needs to be replaced, seal it, prime it, paint it, get it back to me. There's an outside chance that this car could be finished in calendar year 2021. To me, that's exciting. It's a big deal, and it's going to be, again, if this guy doesn't get the car back to me until November, that's not going to happen. If he gets it back to me by August, maybe it can happen. So we'll see, and I will continue to keep you informed. I have posted progress, the latest progress of the car, on my Facebook page if you'd like to take a look at it. Okay? Well, again, as I mentioned, I'm going to do today's essay on the news cycle and what the news cycle is, the sources I use, and how it's affected me. And when I say the news cycle, I'm not going to comment on the news that's on television or cable. I'm not going to comment on what's been on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC or any of those other television news sources, okay? Reason being, I can't comment on those because I don't watch them, okay? And it's not that I don't watch them because I don't like them, because most of those sources have some stories that are worthwhile and enjoyable, entertaining, informative. However, I don't have 2 hours to watch a news show, or even 1 hour to watch a news show for 15 minutes of good content. In my opinion, I've just wasted 45 minutes of my life wading through the garbage that I don't want to see or don't want to hear or certainly don't want to watch. The way I've been getting my news is via reading. I mean, we have the internet, we have the phones, we have our computers. We basically have access to every newspaper in the world. You don't believe me? Go to the Drudge Report sometime. And down at the bottom, after all the headlines, are different news sources from most every country you can think of. Do yourself a favor. Click on one or two of those oddball ones sometimes. Look at the headlines and read the stories. Okay? Do that if you would, because you get a certainly a totally different perspective than you normally would off of a news story, off of a news cycle. It's very informative. It's very educational. And if you don't like the headline, don't read the story. You don't have to sit through baloney. Or if you get 2 paragraphs into it and you think it's baloney or it's not interesting or it's just fluff, you discard it and you just go on to something else. That's the way I've been getting my news. Now, there's pros and cons to that. The pros are you can actually be engaged in something that interests you. I can't tell you how many times I used to watch news programs and it'd be boring story after boring story or commentary and just silliness. Okay. And so my mind wanders. Now they come up with a good story. And it's 30 seconds into the story, I think to myself, wait a minute, this is pretty good. I probably need to re-engage. What did I miss the last 30 seconds? Don't know, because I missed it, because it didn't engage me. You can't go back and read it. Yeah, I guess you could rewind the dopey television if you want to, but who sits with a remote on their lap? Certainly not me. So I get my news sources through things that I read. Again, the pros and cons to that is the pros are I'm going to read what I believe is necessary and engaging and informative and important to me. The bad thing about that is I miss out on a whole lot. And there's certain terms, certain people, certain things in the news now that people will mention, and I haven't a clue as to what they're saying. I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's just a thing. So, and I think this pandemic shutdown has caused people to do that. It certainly has caused me to do that. This whole pandemic shutdown, the shutdown, the wear the mask, don't wear the mask. Do we shut things down or not? Do we hide inside our homes, or do we just throw caution to the wind and run around? If we get sick, we get sick. If we die, I hope it's not me, and everything in between. Okay. It's affected people in the way they think. It's affected everyone. It's affected me, and it's certainly affected you, dear listener. If you don't believe me, I ask respectfully that you re-examine that, because it has affected everybody. And I say that because so many people that I've spoken with, so many people that I correspond with on Facebook, so many people that I've talked to on the telephone, friends, acquaintances, professionals who I deal with, they're different. Many times, oftentimes, I see behavior of somebody who I would consider a very kind and tolerant person, mean and closed-minded. And I think to myself, these people have never been this way before. What's changed? What's different? And it's the pandemic has changed their mindset. The pandemic has changed the way they look at things. The pandemic has isolated them, and you had to be isolated, okay, because things shut down. You couldn't go to a bar and have beer with your friends because bars were closed. Some people couldn't do their job because their place of business was closed. Things did change. This was not it's your imagination type of thing. Changes really did happen. And it's affected me. I mean, I've acted on those things. I've recognized where it affected me. I've acted on it, and I believe I'm back to the path of sanity, okay? Some type of path of sanity, okay? And I know that's hyperbole, because back to the path of sanity infers that I was insane, and that's not the case at all. Well, at least some of you might believe that I'm not insane, but you know what I'm trying to say, okay? And part of that is just maybe my own cancel culture, which has become very popular. And what I mean by that is there's certain people, certain actions, certain things that they say cause me to scratch my head, and I think to myself, okay, I'm not going to pay attention to you anymore because you don't have anything to say that affects me in a positive way, or I cannot get anything positive or constructive out of anything that comes out of your pie hole. Okay. And again, that's why I don't watch the news, but I do read, and I read a whole lot, I read now more than ever before. I read a ton, and it helps me explain, or it helps me understand things that many people don't know what I'm talking about. And I don't know what many people are talking about. The whole term woke society, okay? I've asked people whom I respect, what does that mean? I've had them explain it to me. And then I respond to them, okay, but what does it mean? And it took me a long time to understand what that even meant. And I'm still not sure what it means. In my opinion, I think it's just some made up bullshit, to be honest. Just a way to point the finger at somebody and say, look, I am better than you. That's what it seems to me. I'm better than you, and I'm not going to tolerate anything that doesn't correspond 100% with what I believe, okay? Now, the advantage of reading news and not watching stuff is, if you don't see something that doesn't interest you, you can skip the headline, okay? I don't have to listen to the silliness before I get to the meat of the situation. Case in point, there was a headline about Tori Spelling co-sleeping with her adult children. I'm not going to read that story. Now, if I'm listening to the news, I may have to listen to a 30-second blurb on it before I can get to the new. I want information on the hurricane or the tropical storm that's currently coming up into the Gulf. I may have to listen to a silly story about Tori Spelling before I can hear about that hurricane. I'm not going to listen to that story because it's silliness. I'm not going to listen to a story about Tori Spelling, who, I guess 35 years ago, 40 years ago, she was a halfway popular television star. Okay. I'm not going to listen to any silliness about the Kardashians. Okay. I'm not going to listen to who they're banging, who they're porking, who they're sleeping with. I don't care about any of that stuff. Now, I've had that discussion about the Kardashians, and the only, I ask people, why do people care about the Kardashians? And their explanation has always been, well, they're smart people. Look at all the money they have. Those are two separate statements, folks. And I'm not going to say they're morons. They may just be total business people, okay? But they have absolutely nothing in common with anything I care even a little bit about, okay? So I'm not going to watch that stuff. Now, that's not to say I only look at serious things. If I see a story about baseball, I'm going to read that, okay? Baseball, in fact, all sports stories in many ways is silliness. But it's silliness that interests me, okay? Gossip, the Kardashians, Tori Spelling, that doesn't interest me at all. Baseball, spin rate on a baseball, standings, who's doing what teams are requiring certain people, that interests me. It interests me a lot. But that's my own type of silliness. That's my own brand of silliness. Let's just say that, okay? So I choose my silliness. I don't have my silliness chosen for me. And there's so many news stories, the good ones that is, presented by the responsible journalists that present the facts, okay? And you just don't have to look at Fox News, okay? You can look at most any news source. Many of them, they lean heavily to the left. The New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, all of those news sources lean heavily towards the left. However, they also present lots and lots of good stories that are factual and help you to think. I've had people say, well, I'm not going to read that New York Times because this story they published here 3 years ago said that. Okay, that was a horrible story. A bad example of journalism. But don't read that story. Read the ones that are useful. Read the ones that are helpful. Read the ones that are informative. And if you look at these good news stories that present the facts, And they throw in opinions sometimes, but you can normally tell the difference between the two. And if you read a news story that